Welcome to Talking of Business, where the goal of our podcast is to equip our listeners with tools, systems, and methodologies to help you maximize your bottom line. Catch new episodes every other Monday. Hi, my name is Jordan Disberger. I'm one of your hosts, and joined by me today is my father. How are you doing, Dad?
I'm doing well, and my name's Russell Disberger, and CEO of Aspen Business Group, a consulting and development firm.
And that's something that I always forget to mention. I am the CEO of Purple Marketing Consulting, a full digital marketing company. We do whatever. I keep wanting to look over here. I got a new camera set up, new office, so little turnaround here. So, Dad, what are we gonna talk about today?
I think the thing that is helpful to address is termination, or better yet, how to avoid termination.
Yeah.
And this is an issue that in the last couple of weeks I've had more of my clients struggle with this than normal.
Yeah, we will touch on that. So the name of this episode is how to fire someone, kind of a touchy topic that makes you want to click in, something that makes you uncomfortable that you might want to feel equipped about. So we're going to dive into three aspects of this today. The first one is going to be, well, if you've clicked into this, you think you're already going to have to fire this individual, but we're going to touch on the reasons why you would want to fire someone. And then we're going to touch on things that you could do to maybe mitigate this, give them some second options if you haven't already done that. And then thirdly, we're going to touch on actually executing the firing, not necessarily on the HR side, the systems that you have on making a employee leave, but more on the behaviors and how it affects the organization. So, Dad, to start, how do we decide that we're actually ready to fire someone? What are some of these key elements that someone should be looking for to finally decide that this person might need to go?
Well, I typically will challenge a CEO or a leader or a manager that wants to challenge them just because they want them to go. I try to get them to sit back and say, is this individual costing the organization more than they're providing from an asset? And then you also have to take a look at like a pond or a rock thrown into a pond, and you look at the ripples. When looking at the cost or the contribution of this individual, is the expense or the benefit of this person as it ripples out from one center ring of influence to another, is it worth changing that person out of the company? Because a lot of times people are just so fed up with someone that they want to just plug them out, but they haven't really thought through the full ramifications of trying to change a tire when you're going 50 miles an hour down the road. You need to stop, you need to pull over, you need to make sure that you have a replacement queued up and that they're not going to, in a sense, hit a bump. So it's not uncommon for people to actually delay termination because they don't have all their ducks in a row. I mean, if you're the owner or a CEO or of a leader, you want to keep it profitable and you want to keep the organization the going concern moving forward. Now, you want to terminate when you can't find a way for this person to be an asset, or their expense, their gross negligence, or their exposure is actually damaging the brand of the business or the firm. And you've got to be very, very quick and swift. It's rare that I hear someone say, it's rare for them to not say, I should have terminated that person sooner. People have a tendency to hang on too long, but I want to make sure that they have a plan for it. Now, one of the things to consider is that a lot of times they was like, well, it's easy to replace someone. The cost of turnover, you have to take a look at the training to get someone up to speed. You have to take a look at the replacement cost or the overtime hours that were going to be dumped in to cover the position while the other person's getting up to speed. You've got HR's involvement. You've got all the different organization components that we'll have to work with, that all the different components within the business that you have to work with that's going to add to that cost. And that's that changing that tire of a car going 50 miles an hour down the road is more difficult than a lot of people think.
Yeah, and the more that you talked about that, the more that I was able to relate the different situations to that analogy. In the instance where you might be able to resurrect the value of an employee, that could be you stopping on the side of the road and then coming up with a temporary fix. Whereas in other situations, it may be to the point where you need a tow truck, and that might be when you should have let go of the employee a lot sooner. Because if you drive around on a flat tire, you're going to destroy your rims, and if you destroy your rims, you might not be able to put a tire back on there as easily. You can go on and on with those analogies. Another thing that, as you were talking, I was recently watching a CNBC special, and with the way that everything is operating after the pandemic has started to become more commonplace, is a lot of the workforce, they're quitting their jobs. And I know that's not necessarily what our topic was, but they quoted a stat that on average it costs about $15,000 and
And that's
loss.
for that's a frontline unskilled employee
Yeah.
from a cost of turnover.
Yep, and that accounts for loss in not being able to drive the car, training, bringing someone on, letting someone go, going through all those systems. That's the average cost there. If you're hiring, someone who's a little bit higher up in the company, that cost does go up. So that is definitely a good analogy with the car dad, but a staggering stat. And I think the other stat was that it was about $25 billion went toward replacing employees in 2020. And so that's, again, a staggering stat. So going back to letting someone go, what are some tactics that you can employ yourself to try to resurrect an employee who hasn't destroyed your rims, to continue with the example, and someone who might just need a patch because there was a nail there?
Dr. Edwards Deming talked about driving fear out of the organization. The Arbinger groups, in their book Leadership and Self-Deception, talked about to take a look at yourself as a leader, and maybe you're contributing to the barrier or the belief or the culture. Most employees quit their boss, but also the leadership and the culture around that employee could be causing them to be disruptive and or negative. And thus you're thinking it's an employee, but if you have 2 or 3 people that have failed in the same position, it's probably not as much about the employee as it is the culture. And so what we have to do is kind of discern, hey, before we terminate this person, we need to do kind of an environmental scan and or take a look at that individual to understand what their barriers are. So this is where I typically, if I'm brought into a client, I will go in and I'll do a behavioral assessment, the PDP survey that we've talked about, that measures the employee stress and it measures their morale and energy drain and what motivates them and what their demotivators are. We will have a very great facilitated conversation about those things. I also have a list from the employer of what behaviors they're wanting to have improved. And so knowing what the employee feels, be it a C-suite or be it a frontline employee, depending upon what the employee feels their barriers are, what the behavior that the company wants, we come up with what we call actionable items. That's an agreed upon solution that they can execute. And then we have deadlines. And I make sure that the employee knows that these changes in these behaviors are required, and failure to follow any of those could lead up to your termination. But the company is obviously believing in you enough to give you this opportunity. And based on the conversation we had with the PDP, there's a number of other elements at play here that we all need to look in, but we need to work together to improve. And so I'd say we have about a 10 to a 15, sometimes 20% chance of saving that person. But 80% of the time, the culture is so sour, either with the mindset of the leaders or the mindset of the employee, that neither of them really want to try, and thus you're not successful. So the key is before the culture gets sour enough, we want to try to save somebody before they get into a kind of a boxing match. Because once that mindset has gone south, we go up that ladder of inference and we look for these recursive loops where we're setting up things that's going to cause the employees to screw up, which will justify my belief that the employees is screw up. And then, we just keep doing the same thing just to justify my belief that the employee is no good. And the employee is looking at you as a bad manager and thus having fear, which is causing their behavior to be bad. So we've got to stop the crazy. At one point, this was a willing worker. And unless something's changed, we need to take a look at what's really causing it. And like I said, it's not always a highly successful endeavor, but if you can, within a few coaching episodes with that employee, we could probably discern if this is a salvageable person or not.
Yeah, and with the stats I stated earlier, this is very costly, especially in the market today. And so something very important to analyze. So I know you're speaking generally there, but that generalization comes with tons and tons of experience. I personally have never, in my immediate work, seen anyone get fired. I've only ever heard of people get fired through the grapevine, but you and I were talking before we started this, and you told me that you had been a part of thousands of departures from companies. And so I was wondering if you could talk through two examples for us. One of them, just a quick, brief situation where someone was able to turn it around, and then another situation where someone just was very defiant and you ended up carrying out the layoff.
Well, the call right before this one was for this very scenario. I was asked to coach and or to see if someone's salvageable. And it had not gotten far enough south, but the company was beginning to wonder if there was going to be, if this person could improve their leadership skills. And after just one or two sessions, I reported back and said, yes, they could. And we were looking at how do we, what's the path forward for her, and how can she more lead the way and change her personal brand, because she knows that her brand got negative. And so she knows that she is labeled, and sometimes it's going to take more courage and more discipline on her part to actually continue, because once you get labeled, it's somewhat hard. But I'd say that's a good scenario. Another individual that was a COO of a 1,000-person company, and this was a few months back, that I was asked to do the same thing with as I went into the company, but the ethics and the person's personal values was immediately, on my part, discerned as a mismatch for the company. It was more of a passive-aggressive approach, and it was clear that the individual might give the lip service, but it was passing. The leadership of this company looked at this person as a hero and wanted to do everything that they could to keep him, because the performance, the organization's performance, was so stellar under this guy's leadership that they wanted to keep him. But the damage that this person was, in a sense, creating like quicksand underneath him, there was about ready to be a revolt and an imploding in the entire organization. So the financial numbers are a lagging indicator. And so what you have to look at is culture and morale to see if the performance of that individual is impacting the overall future performance of the company. So I always take a look at the people and the behavior and the culture around them to discern, is it going to impact operations, customers, mindset, and or the financials. And so that particular one, it failed. And so at that point, we had a separation, and the separation happened 3 weeks before I thought it should. But the person kind of just lost it. I mean, and really gave no one any choice but to terminate.
Yeah, no, I think those are both helpful examples of actual situations on either side of the coin. And I think we did touch on the other one, the negative one in a previous episode. So the last point of this episode is actually firing someone, actually letting them go. So I know you've done that multiple times, Dad, but just for someone listening to this who wants to make sure that they're still giving respect to the human being that they're letting go, but they're doing the best thing for their company, what pointers, what tactics would you want to share here?
Well, if you terminate well, and I say well, it's somewhat of not an art, but there's a good way of doing it. No employee should be shocked that they're getting terminated. Most employees, unless it's for gross negligence or criminal activity, most of them should have given an opportunity to improve. If you're ever going to go and fight this in court, you're going to have to show as the company or as the employer that you've gone through the steps to try to give that person the benefit of the doubt to improve, respect them as a human. So they should know if they're going to win or lose based on their own behavior. It is their decision to fail because you've given them the benchmark, you've given them the tools. And if they have failed to hit the performance with the coaching provided, and then at that point, it becomes it's a known issue when you're terminating. So you sit down, and I typically have a letter written. I will read from that letter, and I'll typically have the employer that's terminating along with me when I've been present. And we'll kind of go through the key elements that what led up to it. You understand? Sometimes we give a severance for this to help the individual, but we do this in states that it's allowed in lieu of any claims that they may have against the company. Most likely they have none, but we're trying to do it out of the gracious, and if we can have some sort of a transaction that says, hey, we're going to take care of you, but we also don't want to have you fabricate something, run us through the courts for whatever reason. So we offer them a week, a month, 2 months, a year's severance, depending upon the position and duration that the person's had with the company. And then we get them to sign it. I typically will also make sure that the employee, if they feel that it's unjust, that they have an opportunity to put in their file the comments or their feelings, even if they're refusing to have those. I want them to write a letter that will always be in their file so that we can kind of document the termination. After the employee is left, if it's a hostile one, we always walk them out to the car. And the time to terminate, some people say you do it on Friday, some people say you do it on Monday. But what you want to try to do is be prepared to manage the outcropping, the fallout of that person terminating. So whenever you terminate, you need to be sure and ready to send out an email to all the key individuals and all the key stakeholders that need to be in the know, need to have an immediate meeting so that they understand how to proceed within the organization. What you don't want is that person that left to start undermining the belief that it was just or not just, and or that the company's bad, and or you should quit with them. What we were trying to do is, in a sense, manage the situation, letting individuals that, Suzanne or Brad had a different direction that they wanted to go, and that that as of Monday they won't be here. Do not explain why. It's none of the other individual's business. But what most people want to know when someone else gets terminated, how does this impact me? And am I next? And so what we have to do is assure them that we have a strategy and how we're moving forward, and that the company is going to be good.
Yeah, no, I think that is great advice. I was not aware of all the aspects that went into that. And I did say that no one directly related to me or in my vicinity had ever gotten fired. But in my engineering job, my boss did get fired. And I remember that. And I remember that everyone wanted to know why. And the company shut that down really quick. They're like, it's not really important. You know, we're not coming after anyone. But this was one of those situations where he was walked out of the building. So probably due to negligence or something that that was dramatically detrimental to the company or the company's values.
Yeah,
No,
I
but
mean, and you need to be well orchestrated if it could potentially be hostile, such as emails, communications, letters to vendors, all creditors, everything. So when you do this, there needs to be some pre-planning, and then wham. What's sad is when someone's doing something of gross negligence and you just need to terminate, and you don't have that opportunity to do all the planning, it can really come back to haunt you. So you want to be as proactive as possible, and or know what if something like this was to ever happen, you know what the process or procedures are so that you can execute accordingly.
so a lot of planning going in there, especially if it goes hostile. And you should definitely take that into consideration, regardless if you expect it or not. You should have a plan. Last question, Dad.
So that well, one more. That's the reason why you want to give the opportunity to coach and to try to help the individuals so that they see that the company did care for them. And a lot of times when I've terminated, Jordan, one of the key things that I've done is I was like, all right, obviously, most employees, when they're being terminated, they're not happy either. So it's
Right.
not a shock. And the company wasn't happy. So I then take that minute and say, what can I do to support you? As an outside advisor, and this is what some companies will do, is they'll pay for coaching or consulting for this individual for a career to try to get them on the right foot. It's not that they're a bad person, they're just a bad fit for that job. And
Right.
so we treat them with that level of respect, and we truly do want to make sure that they're taken care of.
Absolutely. So going back to my last point, it was just a follow-up question that I had. So we're talking about someone who's actually a W-2 employee. Could you briefly touch on letting go of a vendor or someone that's tied closely to you, where there's not really going to be any backlash with the court, but maybe someone that you've used for a long time to do your accounting or your marketing?
It's in a tight labor market that we're in today, or even if it wasn't tight, your brand as a strategic partner, as an employer, is extremely critical to maintain. So if you don't treat your vendors with respect, even if you're going to separate from them, you're going to have a negative person out there talking about how bad it is to do business with you. No one should afford that. And again, everyone should treat others with respect. And it's most likely not a good situation. You may have outgrown them and they're too small for you as a vendor, or vice versa. The company that you're working with may have grown too big and you're just not able to provide the level of services necessary. Don't take it personally. Just work with them and give them an advance notice and let them know what they could do to improve. It happens commonly, and if you've been a contractor, you should just, my recommendation is never have 25% of your revenue dependent upon one business, because if you lost one, you still have 75% of your revenue stream.
Right.
So as a vendor, so if I'm the company, I want to make sure that that individual has enough warning if I'm a major source of their revenue, that I'm not going to hurt them because I don't want that bad reputation out there.
Awesome. I think that's great advice. And I have a few examples playing out in my head of where Purple Marketing Consulting won business because I have a severed relationship with a previous client when the previous client had gotten too large for them. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up pretty well, Dad. I appreciate all of your wisdom and all of your experience that you were able to share here. I hope this proves to be helpful for someone who's in the uncomfortable situation of having to potentially let someone go.
And you shouldn't be just termination of any sorts, if done right, is typically a release of pressure from all parties at hand. So done correctly, it's actually not a bad thing. The 1,000+ terminations I've done, I get Christmas cards periodically from some of the people I've terminated. So you can do it correctly.
I do remember one specific individual who bought you like baby gifts when your youngest child, my sister, was born, and he had just been terminated. And then he gave us rafting stuff, so rafting tickets to go whitewater rafting. So no, I think that's very helpful. It's common to have to fire people. It's part of figuring out how to best build your company and for an individual to best build their career. So it's definitely something that has to happen, but that doesn't mean that it has to be uncomfortable, and it doesn't mean that you don't have to seek out help for it. So we hope this has helped some of you guys. This has been Talking of Business with your hosts, Jordan Disberger and
Russell Disberger.
There you go. All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys in 2 weeks.